You're listening to Indications by the Conference Board.
Well, so many companies have had to make numerous changes in operations in the last few weeks, working from home, supply chain interruption, and more. But how do CEOs in general feel right now with the coronavirus still impacting much of the country? The Conference Board releasing its latest CEO Confidence Survey. Steve Odland is the CEO of the Conference Board, and he joins us right now to discuss their findings. Steve, great to catch up with you again.
Hi, Dan. Good to be with you.
Thank you. So give us a sense of what CEOs are thinking right now. I would imagine that, what they were thinking pre the outbreak has kind of been altered in the last couple of weeks.
Well, it has, Dan. The Conference Board did the CEO Confidence Survey round one, ending March 15th, and then we did a second round, which takes into account the last few days of March going into April, and now we've juxtaposed the two, and what a difference between the two periods just a few weeks has made. The CEO confidence about the current situation dropped right off the map, and there's almost nobody who is happy about the current situation. But interestingly, their expectations on the next 6 months have picked up. So, we had some fall off in current conditions because of the trade situation and, what was happening with the U.S. and China. But, obviously the COVID-19 virus has just taken it off the cliff. So the question here going forward is, what kind of recovery are we going to have? Is it going to be V-shaped with a sharp recovery? Is it going to be U-shaped with a more, more long-term recovery, or some other kind of shape that is bad for us? And this is, really driven by the government decision to shut down the economy. And so CEOs are all sitting here waiting to hear what the decisions are on reopening the economy.
But I find it interesting that, we have talked quite a few times already in the last couple of weeks about the fact that this shutdown, and as you said, it is a shutdown of businesses across the United States, and the economic impact that it has caused, I think is significantly different than what we saw back in 2008 leading into the Great Recession. And I'm wondering if there's a recognition of that by some of those CEOs of the difference between the two. And maybe that's in part why they seem more confident for the months ahead.
I think that's right, Dan. And I think, as you know, I was the chairman and CEO of Office Depot during the financial crisis and navigated that time personally. And I think what we saw then is a banking crisis, a lack of understanding of whether the whole banking system was going to be there and so forth. This is different in that we were rocking and rolling up until 3 weeks ago. We had essentially full employment. We had some of the greatest, economic times. If Goldilocks was here, she would say just right. Yeah. And then, boom, it was shut off like a light switch, and everybody saw their revenue drop and so forth. So I think the belief here this time is, there aren't these underlying issues, and so as soon as we can get going again, you don't turn it back on like a light switch, but we can get going again, and as long as we have retained our people and people have hung on to their jobs, even if they're temporarily unemployed, we can ramp them back up and get going again.
When you look at this report and you compare it to the consumer confidence survey that you guys have done, are there similar patterns to the levels of confidence and the hope of the comeback in the second half of the year?
Yeah, it's interesting. CEO confidence has been lagging consumer confidence for the past year or year and a half. It's been an interesting situation where CEOs are less confident, and that was driven mostly by the trade situation. Consumer confidence at the Conference Board is driven more by their personal situation. So how am I feeling about my job? How am I feeling about wages? And when we had a situation that was near full employment and wages were going up, consumer confidence was very high. Now, that's critical to the economy because, as you know, 70% of our GDP is driven by consumer spending. So as long as jobs were intact, wages were rising, that was the engine behind the economic boom, and it gave us great confidence going forward, even though the CEOs were worried about other things. Now it's changed. So now the consumers are getting walloped. We've got about 17 million people who have been unemployed just in the last 3 weeks. Yeah. This is enormous. We had 10 million people that were unemployed during the financial crisis, 17 in 3 weeks. This is just unseen before. And so CEOs are saying, okay, now I can see we're at the sort of the depth of the crisis. We can see that this could emerge, but now you've got a flip where consumers are worried.
So then what are some of the things that CEOs are having to do right now to keep these companies, on some level of normalcy at this point?
Well, the critical thing here, and I think any business leader who is listening needs to be focused on cash. One thing we learned through the financial crisis is any company that had enough cash to make it through did fine. You can recover from almost anything. But if you run out of cash, that's where we saw the driver of those hundreds of bankruptcies. And this is what we're worried about and why Congress has moved with the CARES Act, and you've got the SBA loan program right now to try to get out there and backstop loans and provide direct loans to small businesses. So businesses should be, it's no different than a household. You can't be burning more cash. You can't be having more cash going out the door than you have coming in the door. And as long as you moderate that and govern that, then, of course, you can survive. And this includes, dealing with payrolls. And the best thing, in my opinion, Dan, is for people to take salary reductions but preserve the jobs. I think once you start eliminating the jobs, you've got a really difficult time of coming back.
It is, and we're joined by Steve Odland, who is the CEO of the Conference Board, talking about their CEO conference confidence survey, which came out yesterday. It is interesting that as you go by here, obviously, so many businesses have had to lay people off. They're obviously one of their main concerns is the liquidity that these companies need to have to be able to weather this, whether they're seeing a level of revenue still come into their firm or not right now.
Well, that's right. And so almost all revenue has stopped. 80+% of CEOs say that their firms have been materially negatively impacted. You do have some bright spots in the economy, the Amazons of the world, the food companies of the world that are continue to do well because of the in-home situation. But the vast majority of companies have had revenue come to a stop. So the question is always, how do I stop then having cash go out the door? And, for most people, you can stop investing, you can do things like that, but what do you do with your payroll? This is a huge portion of almost every company's expenditures. And so some people have said, well, we're going to eliminate jobs and put those on the unemployment, obviously 17 million unemployed. But that's a cost to society, and then those people are outside of the company. I think the best thing is retain all of your employees, keep them on the payroll, but cut the amount of pay in order to meet your cash needs. But then when we get through this thing and when we can open back up, and I think it'll be a geographic and a rolling process, but as companies are able to, you've got the people in place and you can react quickly. That'll be the best thing for the people involved, and it'll be the best thing for our economy, Dan.
So the next CEO survey comes out when, and I guess you can probably already have an idea of how that might go depending on how the coronavirus is handled, either on the positive side or the negative side.
I think that's right. It'll be a couple of months. We typically do these surveys. We do the consumer confidence survey at the Conference Board every month, and so we'll get those results here soon. But the CEO confidence is a little longer term because it doesn't tend to change that much. But I think it'll be entirely driven next time by what happens with the government's decisions to turn the economy back on. That's the unusual thing. In past kinds of crises, it's been some sort of underlying factor, a slowdown, it's been inflation or some other macro situation. This was a deliberate decision to take an economy, a global economy, frankly, that was booming, and shut it off in order to preserve lives. And there is a debate then as to what are the criteria to turn it back on? Do we wait until there are no more new cases? Do we wait till it flattens? And what kind of risks should we take with human life? These are the ethical issues that the politicians are wrestling with. But businesses need to engage in that conversation. And we need to find the right balance here because we can't have this bad economy hurt more people than we're trying to help.
Steve, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks for giving us some time on this Friday. Thank you, sir.
Good to talk to you, Dan. Bye.
Thank you. Steve Odland, CEO of the Conference Board.
This has been Indications from the Conference Board.